I used to work the night shift at a hospital as a security guard. It was repurposed as a general hospital within the past 3 or 4 decades. It used to be a psychiatric institution before that. Along with that history came some rather interesting stories and urban legends. I love hearing about that kind of stuff. I could spend hours listening to it and talking about it, but ironically, I'm not really the kind of person to actually believe in it. One of the maintenance guys, an older guy who was actually around before this was a hospital, had the more colorful tales. Some of the stories he told he clarified were just rumors or myths. Others he guaranteed were absolutely true. Stories of patients losing it, mysterious disappearances or deaths, stuff like that. I grew to like him and we talked often. His shift often overlapped with mine since we both worked late. Anyway, I was working one night and there was a floor of the hospital that was going to be renovated, so all personnel and patients had to be moved to other floors to accommodate the upcoming construction. I still had to do a walk of the area, but since there was no one on the floor, it felt a lot creepier than usual. Even on the night shifts, I'd usually have nurses or doctors walking around sporadically. Even just a little bit of human interaction to break up the silence. I was on one end of the hall where the elevators were, and at the far end of the adjacent hall was the only stairwell with basement access. About halfway between myself and the end of the hall, which was maybe 75 feet, give or take, I saw a light flicker on, and then off suddenly in one of the rooms. I stopped for a second, wondering if I had really seen it, or if it was a trick of my eyes. Then I wondered if it had anything to do with the upcoming reno. Maybe they were messing with the wiring and it caused the lights to flicker? That was most likely it. Regardless, though, I called out. "Anybody there? Floor's closed." No response, just like I was expecting. I continued slowly down the hall, a valid explanation in my head for what I just saw. But I was still being cautious. All of a sudden, I saw another room's lights flicker even further down the hall. I paused. I didn't see anyone exit the first room, so it couldn't be someone running from room to room playing with the lights. And so I called out again. "Hello? Hey, if you're in there, stop messing with the lights. Floor's closed." Again, no response. I put my hand on the handle of my mag light, the only real defensive weapon I carry during these shifts, and I walked slowly toward the end of the hall. It was then that I saw the lights in the stairwell at the end of the hall flicker. The stairway that led right into the basement. Something very strange was going on here. Yet I felt myself following the flickering lights to the end of the hall. I creaked open the stairwell to the basement and glanced down. It was dead quiet. Almost no one used this stairwell. If they wanted to reach the basement, people would typically use the freight elevator. I made my way down the stairs slowly, stopping at the door to each floor and glancing into the hallway. The hospital seemed eerily void of activity. I continued further and further down the stairwell, almost in a trance, until I reached the basement, a labyrinth of hallways emptying into large warehouse areas and storage closets. I arrived at the landing for the basement, staring down the dark hallway. Everything seemed so quiet, so still. I waited, listening for any sound that would indicate whether or not someone was down here, or maybe if someone was playing a prank or messing around. Nothing. But then, I noticed at the very end of the dark hallway, a light in the furthest office was turning on and off, sending light spilling into the corridor. Curious and somewhat mesmerized by the flickering, I took a step off the landing and into the basement towards it. But once I did, something just didn't feel right. I was overwhelmed by an enormous feeling of anxiety. Every instinct in my body, every sense that was trained to tell me when danger was close by was lighting up. I backed up into the stairwell and went back up to my floor. I ignored the flickering lights in the basement, and I saw no more weirdly flickering lights since. In the morning before I left, I was talking to my friend, the maintenance guy. I casually mentioned my experience from the night before, telling him I saw some flickering lights that led into the basement, but no one was there turning them on and off. He gave me this eerie look and told me that when the hospital was essentially an asylum, one of the patients escaped his restraints and killed 3 staff members by luring them into the back of the basement and strangling them to death before bludgeoning their heads. Police found him soon after, turning the lights on and off in the basement, repeatedly while staring at the dead bodies, saying the slideshow wasn't working, they aren't moving anymore. He was committed to a more secure facility after that. After hearing him tell that story, I'm quite certain that my instinct to determine imminent danger may have saved my life that night. I live pretty far upstate in New York, and I had to drive back home from the city late one night. The main highway was pretty much empty. Every once in a while I would see another car up ahead, or one coming up behind, but they were few and far between. For a majority of the trip, it was just me, alone on the road. The quiet solitude was interrupted by a silver SUV that came up behind me fast. So fast I didn't even really see it until the last minute. It drove right around me and continued driving ahead until it was out of sight. Someone needs to get somewhere in a hurry, I said to myself, glancing at the clock. It was a little before 3 a.m. Some people just have to rush everywhere, I suppose. I settled into a rhythm. I've done this drive before, and I almost always try to do it at night. There's just something about a long, empty road that's mesmerizing, almost hypnotizing. I began to get a little tired, so I rolled down the window and slightly tilted my head out to get some air. When all of a sudden I see headlights behind me again, coming up fast. Another speed demon, I guessed. The vehicle came up behind me and passed me, and it was the same silver SUV. Like the exact same one. I must have blinked 100 times as I saw its lights disappear into the distance. There was no way. Why and how did that SUV get behind me again? It couldn't have been the same one. But it passed me again half an hour later. The same SUV. Now I was a little freaked. I immediately began looking at the road signs to make sure they were changing, to ensure I was actually moving forward and not stuck in some Groundhog Day type time loop. I know it sounds crazy, but that's my mind at 3 a.m. But I checked, and the road signs were still indicating I was moving forward. I even looked at my phone's GPS, and it showed me still headed towards home. I didn't see the silver SUV for a while after that. I eventually got to the part of the trip I hated, which was crossing through Jersey. I hit my first stoplight in a while, and lo and behold, in my rearview mirror I saw the headlights headed toward me again. The same silver SUV. The light turned green, but I was so focused on the SUV I didn't notice. It blared past me again through the intersection and disappeared into the distance. Just as I was about to hit the gas pedal, A car coming across the road ran the red light and flew right in front of me. If I had started moving when the light turned green, I would have absolutely been hit. And the car was going so fast, chances are I may not have walked away from it. I never saw that silver SUV again. When I was a kid, maybe 12 or 13, I met a girl named Ellie in the hallway of my school. She was pretty, but quiet, and kind of a loner. She didn't seem to talk much to the other kids for the most part, and seemed to keep to herself. I approached her one day and introduced myself, since I was kind of a quiet kid too, and she seemed nice. We ended up really getting along and became pretty good friends. We didn't have any classes together, but I'd meet her in the hall between classes and we'd talk and hang out and walk home together, since we both lived in the same direction. Even though we were friends, and grew fairly close, she was a very private person when it came to personal stuff. She never talked about her family or anything like that. I didn't even know if she had any brothers or sisters. The most she revealed to me was she moved from the Midwest somewhere for some vague reason. I wasn't really one to pry, so I just let her have her privacy. I didn't need to know everything, I was just happy to have a friend. Then the day came she invited me over her house to study and hang out. This was pretty big. Since she was so private, it felt good to reach what felt like another level of friendship with her. We walked to her house, which was a little further from the school than mine, but still within 10 to 15 minutes. As we approached the front of her house, she suddenly realized she forgot her binder that contained all the homework she needed to finish back at school. She asked me to wait while she ran back to get it. I offered to go with her multiple times, but she said she'd be quick. She took off towards the school, and I was left sort of awkwardly standing in front of this random house. After a minute or two, the door to the house opened and a woman came out. She looked at me kind of confused. "Can I help you?" she asked. I was a little surprised by her coming out, so I sort of nervously responded that I was Ellie's friend from school, and she invited me over to study and hang out for a bit. The woman smiled. "Oh yes, Ellie has told me so much about you. Come in, no need to stand out there in the cold." She let me in the house and hung up my coat. We sat in the kitchen and talked for a bit. She told me about how Ellie was sad about the move, but she was happy now that she had a friend like me to hang out with. How she'd always been kind of a quiet kid and mostly kept to herself and played the piano instead of going out and exploring like the other kids seemed to do. After we talked, she excused herself from the room to take care of something. After she did, Ellie walked through the door of the house. She saw me and said, "Oh, good, I thought you left." Then she got sort of a confused look. "How did you get in? Was the door open?" I explained to her how her mom let me in and that she was really nice and that we talked for a little while. Her face sort of sunk and she appeared hurt. She said there was no way her mom was here. Her mom was dead. I immediately insisted that she must be joking. I had just seen and talked to her mom for the past 10 minutes, and she was very much here. I told her all the things her mom told me, about the move, about her enjoyment of playing the piano, about her anxiety of going to a new school. Ellie started crying. She told me that this was her grandmother's house. She came here to live after her parents were killed in a car accident. But she said that sometimes at night, just as she's drifting off to sleep, long after her grandmother is already in bed, she'd feel someone tucking her in just like her mom used to. I sat with her and she cried. We became best friends in that moment. I think her mom was still looking out for her, even if she couldn't physically be there for her.